Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's, that is 4th September 2023, the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look at the important articles which have appeared in the Delhi edition for today's newspaper, and we shall be trying to find out what are the important nuances associated with each of these articles. Now, before taking a look at the articles, an important announcement for all of you. Now, for the next 3 days, we are going to have a kind of a free access for all the recorded sessions, all the live sessions, as well as the various different subject-based quizzes on our portal, on our app. So it will be free for all, and you can access that in order to enhance your level of information, in order to gain access to a good quality source of information. In order to register for that, kindly click on the comment below. Now, having said that, now we come to the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So today we are going to have a discussion for broadly around 6 topics. So basically, the topics relevant for your mains examination, that is measuring hunger across states, that has appeared in the op-ed page, that is relevant for GS paper 2, and also you can find the relevance for essay paper as well. Then status of RTI, that is right to information. There has been a growing concern for some time that this Right to Information Act is being diluted and it is no longer serving the purpose that it should to bring about transparency and accountability in governance. So we are going to basically dissect this particular article to understand what are the concerns and what is it that we should be doing going ahead and moving forward, so that you understand what are the drawbacks happening right now and what is it that you can do going ahead. So this is also going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Then debate around one nation, one election. Now, for the past few days, there has been a growing clamor call for one nation, one election, and an increased amount of discussion has been happening there. So here again, an article has appeared. We are going to dissect this article as well, that why is it that it is being advocated? What is it that the Law Commission tells us about this particular topic? And what are the concerns that people are raising against the topic of one nation, one election? Then few of the articles that we are going to refer for your prelims perspective. Aditya L1 mission, which had been launched on Saturday. Now the orbit changing maneuver has been done successfully and the mission is still healthy. The spacecraft is still very, very healthy. Then DIKSHA platform to provide AI help and thereby induce a better sense of learning amongst the students. So here we shall be very minutely focusing upon, and in a way, we shall be brushing upon the topic of what do we understand by this DIKSHA portal, what is it? Then bank credit to real estate at a record high. What does that signify and what does that indicate is again something we will take a look into. So without further ado, let us take a look at the first topic of the day. And the first topic which has appeared in the op-ed section, and that is measuring hunger across states. So page 7 of the Delhi edition, relevant for GS paper 2 as well as for your essay paper. Now, hunger. So basically, this is a topic which has been in discussion for the past year and a half almost, ever since the Global Hunger Index which had been released. Now that positioned India in a rank of around 107 out of the various different 121 countries that it was measured into. So that put India particularly in bad light. And more prominently, despite all the various governmental measures which have been happening from the side of the state governments, from the side of the national governments, why is it that India's score has been deteriorating? That is where the government had issued a significantly detailed explanation in PIB as well, in order to explain its stance that why this particular data cannot be taken as at face value. And in fact, India went to the extent to register its protest in front of the FAO as well, in order to indicate that how this entire index is being calculated, that in itself is dicey. So this article talks about the fact that yes, we have seen or we have witnessed a decline in terms of India's position in Global Hunger Index, but thereby, in order to understand that particular hunger level at each of the portions of the country, it is advisable to look at the state hunger index as well. And that is what this article is about. It talks about the various different states, their performances, performance at the national level as well, and why that performance is happening, and also the concerns and criticisms provided by the government. That is something we will discuss additionally, which is not provided in this article. So first of all, when you hear about the term Global Hunger Index, so this is released by Concern Worldwide as well as Welt Hunger Hilfe. Now these are global NGOs. Now you need to know who releases this index. This is going to be relevant for your prelims examination. You can get a direct question from this, that which are the bodies or the organizations or the institutions which are responsible for releasing of this index. Having said that, this index, it basically provides a numerical score for each and every country, and that numerical score varies on a 100-point scale, that is 0 to 100. So if you are closer to 100, that means the amount of hunger is very high. If your number is closer to 0, that means the level of hunger is particularly low. So here you have to understand that 100 indicates maximum hunger, whereas 0 indicates no hunger at all. Okay, so that is how the scaling is done. Now the national average overall India's performance is considered to be somewhere around 29, which is significantly high enough, and that is where India's ranking has dipped. But if you look at what are the parameters based upon which that index is released, now this is a question which was and which has already been asked in the prelims examination, that what are the various parameters based upon which the Global Hunger Index is released. So there are 4 various parameters. That is undernourishment, and this talks about calorie undernourishment, that whether you are gaining access or getting access to the same amount of calorie intake, or as per your age and as per the gender as well, whether you are getting a lesser amount of calorie intake as much as you require, or whether you are having a sufficient intake. Then child stunting, child wasting, as well as child mortality. So all these factors, they are utilized in order to understand the hunger index. Now what is stunting and wasting first of all? Now stunting and wasting are forms of malnourishment and malnutrition, where you don't get enough nutrients as much as it is required. Now when you talk about stunting, so it is that phenomena where an individual or an individual child, to be more precise, does not gain the height which is the average at that particular age. So the child's height is reduced quite significantly. It is not as per the requirement. So lesser than average height at that particular age. Then child wasting. What do we understand by wasting? So here it indicates a lack of muscle development, not because of a disease or a kind of any kind of deficiency in terms of the DNA, etc. It is where the muscle mass does not develop enough as compared to what should be experienced at that particular age on an average. So there you have a lacking of the muscle mass. So here, lack of muscle mass. Okay, as compared to the average. Okay, at that particular age. And then you have child mortality. That is the number of children who die due to malnutrition, due to undernourishment, etc. below the age of 5 years. So that is the child mortality which is counted. So based upon all these figures, a hunger index is released which tells you about the total number of people suffering from some or the other forms of malnutrition or undernourishment. Now in India, The calorific undernourishment is a data which has not been released, which has not been measured since 2012 itself. So for more than a decade, we don't have any parameter which measures the calorific undernourishment that anybody is experiencing. So that is why when you calculate the state health index, there this undernourishment is replaced by BMI. That is the body mass index. And body mass index gives to you the ratio between the weight of the body as well as the ratio between the weight and the height compared or calculated in meter terms. So that is where you have the body mass index, which replaces the undernourishment portion. Now, this SHI, it has designated various different states as per the parameters of the score between 0 to 100. And the scoreability is very simple. If any state, for example, has a figure between 0 to 10, then that indicates an absolute low hunger. Sadly, none of the states they figure out in this particular list. Even the best performing states in our country, they figure out in the second category, that is between 10 to 20, where they are put under the moderate category. Then comes 20 to 30, that is put under the serious category. 30 to 40 is alarming, and 50 and above is extremely alarming. Now, India as a country in total lies in the serious category. In India, we have more than 220 million people who suffer from some or the other form of undernourishment or malnutrition. So it is also oftentimes argued in various different global forums that treating undernourishment and malnutrition in India is a global priority because in terms of absolute number, we might have the absolutely largest number of people suffering from this various forms of malnutrition as compared to any other country of the world. So that is why it is of a particular point of concern for us. But here, understand the various different states and where they are designated. Here, it might happen that the data pointers might not be agreeable in certain standards or in certain parameters, but the trends, they never lie. And the trends, they indicate one reality. And that is, if you take a look at the alarming category, that is between 30 to 40, you have the states of Bihar, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. Now, even as per the various researches carried out by the different scholars, they also have indicated to the same fact, and they have also had a common realization on the same fact that these states have an alarming level of hunger. Now, this is something which has been happening for more than a decade now, for more than a couple of decades now, where these particular states, they are prominently well known for their lack of nutrition for the children in particular. Then Gujarat, UP, Assam, Odisha, MP, Tripura, Maharashtra and West Bengal, they come into the serious category. That is between 20 to 30. Now here also, you'll find few of them, they do far better than the national average itself. So for example, if you take a look at the states who are doing particularly good, where you have a moderate hunger category in the range around 16 to 18. So that includes the states of Sikkim, the regions or the UTs of Chandigarh, Puducherry, then Kerala, Delhi, Mizoram, Manipur, Punjab, Arunachal. All these areas, they are particularly doing, in a way, in comparison, particularly well as compared to the rest of the country. Now here, what are the reasons, so to say? Why is it that we are performing so poorly in terms of nutrient intake? And why is it that India, while it is aspiring to hold a position of a global superpower on the global platform, on the multilateral organizations, still we have this kind of a taboo associated with us, where we have one of the largest number of malnourished children population in the world? So here, the reasons are very plain and simple. First of all, lack of nutrient supply rather than the food supply. So with the various different governmental initiatives such as the National Food Security Act, such as the Poshan Abhiyan and so on, now there is no dearth of food supply, so to say. You don't have a substantial population of the country who starves because of lack of food. And when I say starvation, that is where your body starts to suffer because of an absolute lack of food. Right. Now, this used to be reality of our country. If you take a look back around 25 years or 30 years back, you had many of these states who used to report starvation deaths every year. Now, thankfully, that is something which is not happening significantly. So that means with the various initiatives by the central government of the times, by the various different state governments who have been in play, so all of them have initiated some or the other programs to provide ration, to provide wheat, rice, these kinds of food grains. But their nutrient supply, nutrition, that is something which is lacking. Because just by consumption of wheat and rice, you don't get adequate amount of nutrients within the body. And also, in the various different ways in which the products are and the food products are nowadays processed, many of the food products, they are particularly drained out of their nutrient supply. So there comes the importance of focusing upon certain areas such as provision of millets, for example, provision of pulses, vegetables at a very cheap rate, fruits at a very cheap rate. Now, if you continue to do that, the children will get adequate amount of nutrition in whatever small amount that they consume. They will get the nutrient. Now, various state governments have also in their own midday meal scheme programs, they have also started providing iron supplements, iodine supplements, etc. But that is just a step in the ladder. That needs to be made a uniform policy. Then also you have the role played by the fortification of food. What is fortification of food? Now, when we talk about biofortification, so it is that process whereby you enhance the nutrient capability of any particular food item. For example, let's suppose when you talk about biofortification of rice, so thereby, by the various different processing mechanism, you enhance the nutrient capability in each of the grain of the rice, so that when it is consumed, you get adequate amount of nourishment and nutrition. Bangladesh is one of those countries which is implementing this at a large scale in order to fight hunger and malnutrition. India should also do this on priority basis. Then, there is also an inequality in terms of availability of the nutritious food. Now, we are not talking about the cereals which are being provided for free. We are talking about the nutritious food. For example, if you take a look at the inflation of the food items, which does happen on a cyclical basis every year, you will find that certain or the other food items, fruits, etc., they keep on getting very, very costly. Due to lack of storage spaces, due to logistical issues, due to natural disasters, etc., there are multiple causes for that. But when the price rise happens, the accessibility of the nutrients for the poorer section of the society, that becomes prohibitive almost. They are unable to have any kind of supply for that. So that is again a major source. This can be accounted for due to inflation. Then lack of adequate data. As I told you, be it the National Family Health Survey data based upon which the entire state health index is calculated, or be it the National Sample Survey, either of these data pointers, they don't capture the exact amount of calorific undernourishment. They don't capture the real term picture on the ground. There is a substantial amount of lag also. Due to this, particularly important policy intervention measures, they are also not being taken by the state administration, by the central administration, and also by the district and the local level of governance. Corruption also plays a part where people in the public distribution system or the PDS, you get the supply, but that is not distributed equitably across the larger masses. Now, there are certain reasons due to which the government had issued a public statement. The government had lodged a protest in front of Food and Agricultural Organization as well, and it had dismissed the findings of the Global Hunger Index. So you need to be aware of what are the reasons why the government is criticizing this. Yes, there can be an overarching presumption to make that yes, the data pointers are not particularly good. That is why the government is criticizing it. But on what grounds? So the first ground is that when you talk about hunger, hunger indicates the condition of the entire population. And Global Hunger Index, out of the 4 parameters used in the Global Hunger Index, the 3 parameters, they are based upon the performance of the child, not on the entire population. So that is one of the grounds on which the government says that your data is simply done on a very small population size of around 3,000, 4,000 sample size that cannot be representative of a population of more than 1.3, 1.4 billion. So it is not representative enough, was the first point of criticism. The second point of criticism was that the most important indicator, which has got significant weightage, that is of undernourishment. Now, that was calculated based upon a set of questions which were put in front of the people, and that was in the form of an opinion poll of sorts, where you had a questionnaire. For example, if I can just cite you the kind of questions which were asked, one of the question was that in the past year, how many times have you felt that due to lack of money, you have not had adequate amount of food, or you could have had more food in your meal, but due to lack of money, you have lesser food? Now, this is not representative of the hunger. This is neither representative of the quality of nutrition. Right? When you ask such kind of questions, it is no longer about the qualitative or the quantitative analysis. And there also, if you carry it out or carry out this survey for a larger population base, then still it is acceptable. But here also carried out on a very small scale. So, based upon these, and the government also did submit that the various different schemes and the various different programs on the side of the central and the state governments as well, which has been running for some time to provide nourishment. For example, the Eat Fit campaign. Now, Eat Fit campaign is a scheme for providing or a kind of a mass level awareness raising program, which is initiated by the FSSAI in order to instigate the people to consume nutritious food. Then you have the Poshan Abhiyan. Then you have the Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana. Then you have the National Food Security Act. All these programs are particularly aimed to increase the availability of food and also increase and better the health of the child and maternal health care as well. So you need to be aware in this particular topic about the Global Hunger Index, on what basis is it calculated, what are the various parameters involved, what is the scale of that numbering. The State Health Index is calculated based upon the National Family Health Survey data, the National Sample Survey data. Here there is a slight change where undernourishment is replaced by the Body Mass Index or BMI. Then the State Health Index, what are the parameters, then which are the states performing poorly. So there you have to understand the alarming ones and those states whose hunger level is very, very high. Then after that, what are the reasons why that hunger index is higher? So obviously, once you know that, you will be able to provide solutions as well. Why is it that the government is criticizing this move? And also, what are the government schemes which have been initiated in order to end that problem? All those factors we have covered in this article. That will be very, very important for your mains exam. Coming to the second topic, and that is the status of the Right to Information Act. Now, the Right to Information Act. Now, again, this is relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as essay in terms of the types of questions which revolve around transparency and accountability in governance standards. Now, Right to Information Act is considered to be one of those legislations which have done tremendous amount of work in order to bring transparency and accountability in the governance setup, where the individuals, they have the right to ask questions to the government directly and get the reply from the government that, okay, this much amount of money has been spent in this particular program, so that you yourself can carry out various different social audits. For example, you have certain groups. Here you can take the example of certain groups who basically they have various different RTI activists working under their ambit who continue to carry out the social audits. So, for example, let's suppose a large population set. Okay. Now, with the help of the mechanism of RTI, let's suppose an individual organization or an individual activist, it submits or requests for the data from the government that how many people out there in a particular district, in a particular region, how many people they get access to your free food supply. Because we are talking about nutrition, so let's take this example itself. How many of them are getting supply of food and food grains with the help of public distribution system? Let's suppose the government gives you the name of 20,000 people in a particular region. Let's suppose. This is even though very large a number, but let's assume. Now, what these activists, they carry on as their work, as their profession is, that individually they will go on and check these people out there to find out that whether indeed these people are beneficiaries of the government programs or is the data pointer being fudged somewhere. Now, eventually, let's suppose if they find out that out of this 20,000, 1,000, their name is there on the list, but then they have never taken any food grain from the PDS. So immediately, that will be a form of a social audit. Right? It is not a financial audit. It is a social audit. That which sections of the society, they are not getting the benefit out of any particular government scheme or program. So immediately, that will instigate the government, that is supposed to instigate the administration, spur them into action, that if my program is deemed to be providing some amount of supply to this large population, if thousands amongst them are not receiving it, so either corruption is happening at the level of the distribution kiosks, or there are some fudging of the list and someone is siphoning off the money. So once the transparency comes in, then the government schemes also which are being implemented, they start becoming much more effective. Because once you implement the scheme, implementing a scheme and bringing about a new scheme, that is not the difficult task. The difficult task is the execution and ensuring that a consistent feedback loop mechanism is maintained in order to understand the lacunae in implementation and thereby being able to modify the schemes accordingly. But due to certain changes which have been brought about in the RTI Act by the state and the central governments as well, and the ambit of that act as well, that has in a way diluted the provisions of the act to such an extent where now you have a greater leeway on the side of the government officials, on the side of the government-run institutions, that they can deny you the right or the access to the data. Now, what are those concerns that the activists have been raising for some time now, that our access is being denied and we are not given the data pointers anymore? So let us talk about the concerns for a bit. So first of all, the public data which is available, which is being sought by these various social auditors and the various different NGOs and various different groupings. Now, this particular public information, earlier, it could be withheld, citing national security in certain cases. Some data pointers anyways are not published regardless of how many requests or the information that you seek based upon national security. So that is said and granted, fair enough. National security should have a prime prominence given to that and associated with that. So fair enough. But when you talk about the personal data or the public data, so that disclosure of citizens by the government, that is not done unless and until there is an overriding public interest in doing so. So this was the earlier provision, that it made it subjective on the side of the government, that it can release the data in case there is an overriding public interest, or it can deny you with the data. However, with the latest Digital Data Protection Act, which has been implemented, now that has brought about a complete prohibition into the access of the public data. This has made social audits almost impossible to be implemented, almost impossible to be carried out. Now, what will be the consequences of it? Corruption will remain unchecked. Corruption at the level of the administration, inefficiencies, not always corruption, inefficiencies also will go unreported. Now, this is a kind of a transparency measure that as a country we all had arrived at. So, There is no particular development which can happen in terms of how the growth of a democracy happens. So if you start bringing back the level of transparency, then that democratic growth will always be in a slower momentum. So that is why it is a point of concern, because you have to understand any state government, even the central government, various different institutions of the government. Now, naturally, the institutions, they have a pushback against transparency. That why is it that we should give you the data? Who are you to ask us about the data? We will give the data to CAG. CAG will carry out the audit. Who are you? And what right do you have to seek the data from us? So naturally and normally, when you go to the government institutions for any data, they give you a pushback. That is why these legislations have been brought in, so that everybody is bound to give that sense of information to you. So there is a kind of a rollback in that mechanism here. But there are certain other set of concerns as well. The amendment which was brought in 2019 gave the overarching power to the central government to control the tenure, the term, as well as the pay scale, the salary of the information commissioner, the chief information commissioner out there. Now think about it. The ideal process or the standard or the crucible on which you can gauge the neutrality of the information commissioner is based on the fact that whether their tenures are independent or not. If their tenure can be controlled by any particular government, state government, national government, any of them, then that brings about a conflict of interest in terms of decision making as well, in terms of provision of data as well. So this hampers with the neutrality of the information commissioners, right? Hampers neutrality. Okay? Then the rules which have been made by the central and the state governments as well. So it is not always the central government in itself which has, through various different norms, initiated a kind of a pushback, but the state governments are also doing so, because as I told you, the government institutions, they have that tendency to provide that pushback. Nobody wants anybody to look into their own data books and their own accountability. So for example, if you talk about the mode of payment, how you carry out the mode of payment in order to register any kind of information that you are seeking from the government, you have certain states such as the state of Tamil Nadu. Now, state of Tamil Nadu has only certain set of payment measures or payment mechanism that it accepts, right? It does not accept Indian postal orders as a method of payment. Now think about it, a person from an area, rural area, semi-urban area, now postal order, Indian postal order is one of the ways in which they can easily make the payment, and that makes this particular legislation accessible to them as well. Whereas, if you make it mandatory that everybody, if you want to seek a particular information, you have to get the court-approved stamp paper, get it attested, and then send it to us, now that is a prolonged time-taking process, and that is also costly, by the way. So that is, again, when we talk about, let's suppose, payment mechanism. So that is disenfranchising, where you are not encouraging the masses to participate. You are making it a niche area that only certain people will be able to file these RTI queries. Now, take the example for what has been cited in the article as well, the Jharkhand government. Now, the Jharkhand state government did not have an information commissioner for almost 2 to 3 years. That post was lying vacant. So that is, Jharkhand as a state has been given as an example, but various different states also follow the suit. So that again means all the queries that you send, they won't be replied to, they won't be returned to. So there is a significant lack of transparency brought there as well. So irregular appointments. Now, whenever you have irregular appointments, that holds a question in any appointment that you carry after that. Let's suppose I have held a post vacant for 3-4 years. After that, if I appoint a person there, now always there will be a question which will be asked that why is it that after 4 years you have appointed this person only? Does that smack of some kind of favoritism out there? So all of that basically accounts for a distrust in the public machinery. And that is never good for the perception which needs to be created amongst the masses, that democracy is basically for the people, by the people. Then there is a lack of online mode of registering your queries by the various different state governments. They don't have the online portal. Few of the state governments, what they have done is that because they have a lack of their own online portal, they have partnered with other state. Think about it. If you are living in a state A, you have a query. Now, you are supposed to, if you want to register your query online by the online portal, you need to go to another state government B's online portal in order to register your query. So obviously, you can think about the professionalism by which your query will be handled. Overall, you have to understand that whenever you bring online medium in any aspect, it brings about a greater amount of accessibility, greater amount of inclusion and inclusivity. Because then, even if you are sitting in a remote area, just that you have the access to internet, you can always end up participating in that exercise of democracy. So that is why the states, the central government also needs to work on that. Even the central government's portal, if you have visited, it always appears to be very, very old and not very much developed. So that is where it needs to be made much more public friendly, and it needs to protect the data along with that as well. Okay, so these are the major concerns. So what is the way forward? First of all, awareness about the need for transparency. Amongst the larger masses, if you inquire, you have a larger section of population who is absolutely okay with not getting these data pointers. They have never even thought of getting these data pointers from the government, because that is the norm in which the population has been born and brought up, where the government has always acted as a kind of a master, and there the relationship between the master and the public has never been to seek accountability. So larger section of the population is absolutely okay with that lack of transparency. So there needs to be a large awareness raising programs, and this needs to be done by the civil society and the various NGOs who are at work. Now they need to be carrying out campaigns, street plays, etc., various programs on the radio channels, TV channels, etc., to raise the awareness that why, when, and how of it. If you want to seek data, how do you do so? Many of us, many of the time, would have wondered about a government program, but we don't know the mechanism to seek that data from the government. So that is a process which people need to be made aware of. Then, the entire medium by which you register your query, that needs to be enabling. It needs to be inclusive, affordable for everyone. So any kind of payment mechanism, online medium, etc., they should be encouraged. And then eventually, we all have to understand that we are the citizens for which any state government or the central government that we elect, they are accountable to us. They are not only accountable to us by the vote that we cast in the exercise of democracy. They are accountable to us in terms of each and every penny which is spent, every rupee which is spent by the government. So despite the institutional pushbacks, now institutions such as the Ministry of Defense, the Acquisition Committee, etc., they will always have a pushback. Nobody wants to show you their own books. So we have to fight against that institutional pushback. That is why the legislations, they need to be enabling rather than disabling and a niche area. Okay? So that is something you need to understand. Now coming to the next article. Now that is, what is the debate around one nation, one election? Now I am sure that for the past 3 to 4 days, you would have heard a lot about this entire process of one nation, one election, where the government has initiated the setting up of a committee which will inquire into the details of one nation, one election, the pros, the cons, the benefits, the concerns associated with it. But here, we will analyze in very crisp detail, very briefly, that what are the arguments in favor of holding one nation, one election? What are the concerns raised? What is it that the Law Commission tells us? So first of all, what are the arguments in favor which point to the fact that one nation, one election can be a wise move? So first of all, let us consider that. And please understand, as a civil services candidate, it is absolutely pertinent for all of you to maintain a stance where you are able to look at both the positive as well as the negative aspect. Your voting preference should not overwhelm your ability to analyze any particular topic at hand. Okay, many of the times it happens that we become so biased in terms of our opinion that we take a look at only one side. But when you write the answer or your essay, you have to be absolutely neutral. So arguments in favor: first of all, the entire electioneering exercise is a costly endeavor. Now, not just relying on the cost incurred by the Election Commission, but if you talk about the costs which are incurred by the various different political parties, various different campaigning processes, the administrative cost of moving large number of people en masse from one region to another. Now that cost is very huge. Even though the Election Commission will tell you that the cost that they have incurred in a particular set of year for 5 to 7 years is only around 8,000, 9,000 crores. But much more than that amount is spent in state elections itself. Think about the recently concluded Karnataka state election, where you had videos appearing almost on a daily basis of various different leaders distributing cash amongst the voters, distributing liquor and other substances amongst the voters as well. Now, where does that money come from? That money eventually, from some or the other way, is lined up from the public pockets themselves. Isn't it? None of these leaders, they have their own money minting machinery. So that is why when we talk about the expenditure, you have to look at the larger prospect. Every time there is some or the other election which is being conducted, which is being held. So you need to be able to conserve that cost. Then huge manpower deployment. So any government sector employee, if you talk to them, so for a state, for the national level, so they will always be entangled in some or the other election duty for some substantial amount of period. So you need to provide them with the training, you need to then send them for the election duty. So it easily consumes 2 months to 3 months of their productive time for the state election, then separately for the national election as well. Then maybe if the state elections are going to be held again, maybe the national elections are going to be held again. So that process repeats itself. So there is no significant time allocated, or the time which is left over, for them to carry out their own required work. Take the case of the teachers, the government school teachers. Now, while we complain on one hand that we have an absolute lack of teachers, but in all the election duties, you have these teachers being deployed, the schools being occupied as polling centers and polling booths. Now, that is a kind of a contradiction in itself. So you need them to put in greater amount of work hours in the job that is designated to them. And their job, the government employee's job, is not to carry out elections. Fair enough. Once every 5 years, you deploy them for that. Now, the security forces. You have the state security forces, the central security forces, CRPF, CISF. They are frequently deployed in many of the areas. And please understand, in certain states such as Uttar Pradesh, you have the election which is carried out in 7 different stages. It is not carried out in one day. It is carried out in 7 to 8 different stages, which means what? It will go on for almost a month and a half. So the security forces also being deployed heavily in these areas basically stretches them thin as compared to what their real requirements are. Then political campaigning goes around all the year round. Now, while political campaigning might be very entertaining to the ears, it might provide you with a significant amount of masala news as well. But you have to understand that this continuous political campaigning going all the year round, because again, if you take a look at the later part of this year, you have elections being scheduled in the state of Madhya Pradesh, then Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh. So already the political maneuvering is going on, the campaigning is going on. Now, in a way, it diverts the attention of the elected leaders from the work they are supposed to carry out. They consistently are in the battle for saving their own seat, saving the seat or the vote of, securing the vote of their own electorate and so on. But the side factor which nobody pays significant attention to is that consistently all year round political campaigning which is carried out, it vitiates the political atmosphere. in the sense that it brings about a level of animosity amongst the leaders, and that perpetuates amongst the masses as well. Presently, you will find that the entire country, and that is the part of the entire world and the path that the entire world is taking, that the level of polarization is very high. And when we say polarization, people believing that what they are thinking is right, everything else is absolutely wrong. So you don't have any middle ground. So that polarization in the society increases due to viciousness of the political attacks being carried out all throughout the year. So here, please pay attention when you are writing also to talk about the social disturbance carried out because of that. Social disturbances. Increased polarization. Okay. And also eventually leading to fragmentation of the society, which is never good. Then, timely implementation of policies is lacking, because many of the times you have, again, model code of conduct which is implemented as soon as the election dates are announced. Now, after that, you cannot go on to launch any policy out there. So for a substantial period of the year, and this is not a small time or a small time window that we are talking about. 2 to 3 months is a large time window where you cannot implement the policies. Almost all the governmental works, right from the level of the secretariat, that is the secretaries, additional secretaries, everybody starts taking care of the electioneering process itself. For example, in these states that we talked about, there is already a system where the training has been initiated for certain level of employees there. But what has been the condition in our country? Did we always have a separate national and state election? The answer is no. In fact, in 1951-52, when the electioneering process was initiated in an independent India, the national and the state elections used to be conducted simultaneously. That continued up till the 60s. However, there was a blip in 1959. In 1959, till that point of time, the state and the national elections were being run simultaneously. They were being held simultaneously. But in 1959, for the first time, what happened was that Article 356 was instigated. And as per the Article 356, the elected government of the Communist Party, that is the late Sri EMS Namboodiripad, now his government was removed. And there was a precedence rule which was brought in, and subsequent elections which were held. So that brought about the decoupling. Then in the late 60s, again by taking the help of Article 356, you had various different state governments which were consequently put into, and the various states put under the precedence rule. So that is where the decoupling happened. Still, you have certain states such as Odisha, for example. Odisha still has the elections held every 5 years along with the national election itself. But many other states, they have gone out of sync with the national election. So what is it that the Law Commission has reported or advised? So basically, if you take a look at it, the 1999 Law Commission, headed by Justice B.P. Sanjeeva Reddy, now that Law Commission encouraged the forming or the holding of simultaneous elections, citing the advantages that we have just seen. So it supported it. Supported the measure. Okay? But then, in 2018, the Law Commission chaired by Justice B.S. Chauhan, while Justice B.S. Chauhan's Law Commission talked about the fact that yes, there can be advantages of one nation, one election, this Law Commission also talked about the fact that under the present circumstances, you cannot hold this particular one nation, one election unless and until you provide certain amendments to the Constitution and the rules of proceedings for the Lok Sabha as well. For example, when you talk about Article 83(2), when you talk about Article 172, for example, they all talk about the tenureship of 5 years for the Lok Sabha as well as the state legislation respectively. Article 172 talks about the state legislative assemblies. Now, they talk about the tenureship of 5 years. Now, how can you hold those elections now, Simultaneously, if let's suppose a state like Uttar Pradesh has had its election in 2022, how can it again have its election in 2024 when the national election is scheduled to be held? So that is those were the problems which were highlighted, and B.S. Chauhan's Law Commission indicated that yes, you can carry it out, but it will require a significant changing in the federal structure in the constitution itself. A lot of amendments would be required, but it would save you money. But here, we should also be knowing what are the concerns raised. Why is it that you have a substantial chunk of the population who is opposing the move? What are the reasons for the same? So the first reason cited here is, first of all, the exact execution of it. What do we mean by that? For example, let's suppose you hold the election simultaneously. Let's suppose you have held the national election. Okay, let us represent national election by NE, and let's suppose you have held the state election as well. Now the government that you have elected at the national level, you have elected it for 5 years. Okay, and it's the same thing you have done in the state election itself. But let's suppose the state government loses its majority, or maybe there's a failure of constitutional machinery, Article 356 is used, or any of these parameters, and this government falls within 2 years. So the next election, there's a time of almost 3 years before the next election. So if the government has basically been put out of power in 2 years itself, what will happen for the rest 3 years? Will you implement President's rule for the next 3 years? So for that, you need to be amending the constitution there as well. Now, if you implement President's rule for 3 years, then in a way you are vitiating the need for the state legislative assembly itself. Now, there are certain examples across the world where this process is followed, where what is done is that once you have the existing government which falls, that government will not fall unless and until the opposition has the required numbers. And only when the opposition gains the required numbers, then the earlier government is put out of power, and then the opposition is put into power. So whether you deploy that particular mechanism to ensure stability and continuity, otherwise this is a very difficult mechanism to implement. Second, what is also being alleged here and what is also being argued is that it goes against the very fabric of federalism. How? So, that goes behind the very argument of one nation, one election. So here, the argument is that India is a union of states. So that is where it goes against the very fabric of federalism to treat all the states as a kind of a unitary mass there. But here again, you can make a counter argument that when we talk about union of states, we do not talk about the federal structure as is being implemented in the US Constitution, Indian Constitution and the US Constitution. They are different in terms of the level of federalism that they provide. So which federalism are we talking about? And just by holding elections, does that mean Odisha does not have the federal structure within it because Odisha election and the national election are being held at the same time? Does that mean federalism is being vitiated there? So you can have counter arguments there as well. Then the third is that check for the democracy or democratic accountability. Now, the argument made in this is that when you have separate state and national elections, you always have a recourse, or the citizens, they get a chance to evaluate the performance of the national government separately and the performance of the state government, the local government separately. So if you do it separately, you will be able to punish the people who have not performed very well. Whenever and oftentimes it has been seen that when both these elections are merged, then people's choices in electing the candidates at the state legislation, at the central parliament as well. So oftentimes that gets mismatched and there's a confusion created because you judge the state government based upon the performance of the national government, and vice versa can also happen. So for a better democratic setup, it is always advisable to have separate elections. Here again, counter argument can be made only with the example of the state of Odisha as well, because the last time when it was held, Odisha, the parliament election as well as the state legislative election in Odisha when it was held, now the electoral choices that the people made was very distinct. They elected a different political party at the state and they elected different political party at the central level. So that indicates that yes, the electorate is intelligent enough. But then again, that is an argument which holds against the very principle of one nation, one election. Another concern is the cost. Now, the cost incurred by the Election Commission, as is reported by the Election Commission, if you divide that cost on a per capita basis, it comes close to around rupees 27 per person. Now, that is not huge in order for ensuring that people get to exercise their democratic rights on a regular basis. So that is where you have the cost check also. But again, when you are calculating the cost, you should not always calculate the cost by the Election Commission itself. You have to calculate the cost incurred by all the entire electioneering process, the political parties involved, the campaigning process involved, and that is the cost. The cost should also involve the lack of the government workmanship which has happened during all those months where the preparation for election was being carried on. Okay, so these are the arguments in favor, arguments against that particular principle. What is it that the Law Commission has recommended? So bolster these points. As this topic will come again in discussion again and again, you have to hark back upon these points. Now taking a look at certain topics relevant only for your prelims examination. So an orbit raising maneuver for Aditya L1 has been done. This is very similar to the orbit raising maneuvers that were being done for Chandrayaan-3 mission as well. Now, this particular mission here, what is relevant for your prelims examination, you need to be aware of. Now, it was launched on 2nd of September, the Aditya L1 mission, and we all are aware why it is referred to as L1. That is because L1 is a Lagrange point that we are talking about, and Lagrange point, that is obviously going to be important for your prelims this year. So Lagrange point is what? As we have discussed previously as well, it is that particular point which exists between any celestial objects, any two celestial objects, where the gravitational push and pull between them holds that particular point in that neutrality where a spacecraft can position itself for a stable duration. So that is the Lagrange point. Between the sun and the earth, you have 5 Lagrange points. L1 is the Lagrange point where you will have consistent access to solar rays without any eclipses happening in between. Okay, and NASA had prior to this had launched one of its mission at Lagrange L1. Now here, you have to understand that the ISRO telemetry tracking and command network, right? So that is ISTRAC. ISTRAC, that is responsible for the orbit raising maneuver, which is carried out by the various satellites. So which organization, which institution carries it out? It is the ISTRAC which carries it out. Okay, periodically you will be coming across other orbit raising maneuvers which have happened. UPSC is not going to ask you about the orbit. Another aspect that you can notice here from your geographical perspective is look at the orbit here of the satellite. You will come across the orbit. So presently, after the orbit raising maneuver, the orbit is 245 kilometer into 22,459 kilometer. So for any satellite, this orbit indicates that the closest point from the planet Earth is around 245 kilometers from the surface, and the farthest point from the surface is 22,459 kilometers away. So this turns out to be your apogee of the satellite, and this turns out to be the perigee of the satellite, that is the closest and the farthest points. So keep observing these with each and every orbit raising maneuver. Now, coming to the other article, DIKSHA e-education platform to offer artificial intelligence help. Now, what is DIKSHA portal? So Diksha is an online portal where you have a large repository of various different materials required to be taught to the children from various schools, so both at the central level as well as the state boards, etc. So you have, for example, various NCRTs which are provided at the Diksha portal. So the Diksha portal is a national platform for school education which was launched on 5th of September on Teachers' Day in 2017. What is it? It is an initiative by whom? By the Ministry of Education overall. So initiative in the domain of digital learning by the National Council for the Educational Research and Training, that is NCRT, and the Ministry of Human Resource Development. Now developed based upon the core principle of open architecture, open access, open licensing. So as of now, if you take a look at the Diksha portal, so it has got around 2.43 lakh contributions made by more than 11,000 academics across the country. So it is a kind of an open platform to enhance the level of education, the accessibility of education provided for all. So this Diksha portal is relevant for your prelims. Now here, another matter which is relevant for your prelims is the fact that here Diksha portal is trying to make use of AI engine, that is PAL. And what is PAL? PAL is personalized, adaptive learning. Now, how this will perform is by giving you a simple example. Let's suppose a class 9th standard or an 8th standard student, that person is accessing Pythagoras theorem on the portal. Now, as per this adaptive learning mechanism, let's suppose you commit a mistake in solving any of the questions by or the basics of Pythagoras theorem. So automatically this platform or AI will direct you back to the video which talks about the basics of Pythagoras theorem. Again, you will be led to the various exercises associated with this. Any mistake that you commit, based upon the type of mistake, you will be redirected to the type of question or the type of concept that you need a confirming to. So that is where it can become much more enriching, self-learning, as well as curative for a larger section of the population. Now, Diksha platform along with PAL is being implemented by various different states and also certain edtech companies as well. So there, the cost incurred is very high. So that is where the states are unable to implement it on their own. So certain states have started bringing about their own engines, AI engines as well. But here, for your prelims, you need to be aware of what is this Diksha portal. You need to be aware of that PAL is associated with what. You can have a direct question that PAL, an AI platform, is based upon or dependent upon and or is going to help which of these initiatives. So that is a kind of question that you have to be aware of and you have to be prepared of. Now, coming to the last article, bank credit outstanding to real estate at record high, which tells you what? That the amount of bank credit given to the real estate sector, both for housing as well as commercial. So when you talk about real estate, it will consist of both housing as well as commercial. Now, if the amount of money being handed out or the amount of credit being given to them are at a record high, so that indicates certain parameters that you need to be aware of, because in economics you will find that in the prelims, trend-based questions are and pattern-based questions are oftentimes framed. So here, what is the pattern here? Once you have the credit in these sectors growing, if the credit increases, means what? Construction activity will be significantly promoted. Now, construction activity, when it is promoted, it is one of the largest job providers in the entirety of the sector of economy. So the number of jobs which will be generated because of this, that is also going to go higher up. Other than that, this will also ease up the availability of houses. Now, in our country, in almost all the cities, you will find that affordable housing is not available. Houses and the house prices are very high, exorbitantly high. So That is where if you have more construction being carried out, that means there will be an ease of supply as well, greater supply as well. So this will bring the cost down. Okay, it will bring down the cost and it will make affordable housing possible for all. Also, that means that there is a greater amount of economic demand within the entire sector. That is why more commercial spaces are also being created. So this is a green shoot for the economic growth in the near future. But this also sometimes poses a kind of a red herring dependent upon what we have seen in China unfolding very recently, where all the real estate companies, they had picked up huge amount of credit in the past couple of decades. They had made thousands and thousands of various different apartments, various different flats, and lakhs were churned out almost every year. Now, after a point of time when you don't have enough buyers, then all these, they start turning out to be NPAs, the non-performing assets. So that NPA crisis, thankfully, from which the banks have emerged as of now. So the banks need to be watchful before giving credit furthermore, so as to ensure they are not creating oversupply. Otherwise, again, that bubble will be created. Again, you will face the problem of NPA crisis as well. So these are the factors you have to keep in mind from this small article itself. Now let us take a look at the subjective questions which can be framed from here. So discuss the parameters used to determine the global hunger index. Elaborate upon the performance of India in the index and the criticism leveled against the mechanism. So here, if you take a look at this question, this is a question which requires a brief answer of 150 words. So the introduction here will talk about the global hunger index itself. Now, even though it is not asked, in the introduction you have to write that global hunger index is released by Concern Worldwide and the NGO as well. Right? So the various NGOs associated with this you have to talk about. Now this global hunger index is measured based upon the parameters. You mention those parameters. That will be your introduction. After that introduction, immediately, the introduction should be completed within 20-25 words. After that, immediately you talk about that global hunger index gives us an idea about the level of nutrition in any particular society. You talk about the global hunger index in a couple of sentences. Then after that, you talk about what has been India's performance, and the performance of India you have to elaborate that we have performed poorly in terms of the undernourishment parameter and category, and then the criticism that the government has leveled against them, and also the criticism that we have discussed. You can give the example of the type of questions being asked in the questionnaire for undernourishment. Also, it is advisable, even though if you cannot write in very elaborate form. So, for example, in a bubble form, you can talk about government initiatives, right, to fight hunger. You can draw a flowchart here, or you can make it much more graphically representative. For example, Eat Fit campaign. Okay. Then you can talk about, let's suppose, Poshan Abhiyan. Then you can talk about National Food Security Act. Then you can talk about Matru Vandana Yojana. So like that, Anganwadi workers, you can talk about all of these, and thereby you can also designate or indicate to the evaluator that these are the government-run initiatives. That will always fetch you greater amount of marks without occupying a lot of space. Then, discuss the concept of one nation, one election. Critically analyze the requirement as well as the concerns raised around the issue. This is again of 10 marks. So here again, in the introduction, what is it? Then, critically analyze the requirement. So what are the requirements and also the criticism of that? Both of them you have to talk about. You don't have to talk or bring only one side of the argument. So the entire discussion that we have had, why it is favorable, what are the concerns raised against it. Now when you are raising the concern, don't start putting in the counter arguments that we have had a discussion about. That will vitiate the entire requirement or the principle of providing that kind of criticism. Okay, with that, eventually in the conclusion, you have to talk about that how eventually it has to be based upon the broad-based decision-making framework where the public needs to participate in that decision-making process, and a larger public opinion needs to be sought before implementing a measure like this. Okay, so that is all for our discussion for the newspaper headlines for today. We will meet again tomorrow for the newspaper analysis as well. I would advise and suggest to you that please do visit our Telegram channel and our Telegram page. The link of that is provided in the description below, and thereby go through the various different MCQs which can be framed from the topic to gain an access or an idea about your level of understanding as well. Overall, if you have liked the video, please don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Till we meet again tomorrow, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.